Hello, and thank you for logging on to the Foundation for Physician Advancement podcast channel in partnership with Convey Med. FPA is a nonprofit built for and run by Marnie Reed and a group of dedicated physician educators. Our mission is to help physicians build a successful practice in today's healthcare setting through the development of your leadership skills and business acumen. I'm Marnie Reed, Executive Director, and we hope you enjoy today's discussion. This episode was recorded live at one of our Building a Successful Practice courses, so please pardon any background noise and conference references. This episode features moderator Dr. Cynthia Emory leading a discussion on Operations 101 with faculty Dr. Neil Badlani, Dr. Richard Yoon, and certified financial planner David Blain.
All right, so I will kick things off initially. 4 questions for Neil and Rich. So let's say you've got all these financial ratios, you've got all this knowledge now, and you want to go and you want to ask all these questions. So what's the best way to approach, I'll start with Neil first. So how do you approach looking at the books, right? When do you ask the question? Is it something that you do at dinner on the first interview? Is this something that you do, pull off the practice manager to the side, or how do you approach that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So, obviously it depends a lot on your job, right? If you're going to a big health system, you may not be worried as much about all of these numbers right away. You're worried more about, what is your salary? What is your compensation structure? Is it fair to you? If you're joining a private practice and, you're interested in being in this place for a while and seeing the practice grow and be successful, I think it is fair to obviously ask about those things and understand them from the get-go. I would just personally try to make sure that this was the place I wanted to be and these are people I wanted to be with and that there's a fit personality-wise and clinically. So I wouldn't ask about it right away, but then as you're getting to discussions of salary and things like that, it should come up. When I joined a private practice, it's a small practice. They can give you a salary, but they're not giving you anything, right? Like, this is how much you're earning, and if we say that we're going to guarantee this amount and you make less than that, then what are we going to do, right? So you have to understand, like, what is your overhead? What are you actually bringing in? So even though you're giving a salary, they're going to want it back in some way. So I think pretty early on in that situation, you need to have those discussions. And like we talked about before, there needs to be transparency, there needs to be trust. And so you should understand these things so you can see where they're making profit and where they can do better.
Yeah, and I agree with that wholeheartedly, especially if you're going into a private practice scenario. I was just talking to some folks at the table. On the flip side of this part of your career, when you become an attending, whether you like it or not, business is going to be an important part of it. And when you're approaching a private practice, just like Neil said and Mike said, it's a reasonable question to have that transparency and ask for the books. Are you guys running a healthy business, right? Is this something that's going to be sustainable for me and my family? Because I don't know about any of y'all in the room. I hate moving, right? How many times have we moved in our careers? I am so sick and tired of moving. I just don't want to move anymore. But I also think that the same question goes, even if you're going into an academic or hospital model, but it's just a different kind of question. Just like Neil said, I care less about how the hospital runs, because we were just joking about, every time we have our A&R meetings, like, why is there a work comp? Why is there $1 million of work comp, 90 days in AR? Like, how's that even, like, why are you guys just leaving that money on the table? You have to understand that. But another way to ask the question going in is, okay, so orthopedics is pretty profitable for your hospital. How are you reinvesting that into our department, right? Like, are you getting us newer technology? Are we getting more research staff? Are we getting more MAs, more PAs? Are we getting more salary line to help grow our business? It's just another way to ask how healthy that part of your business is and how invested they are, right? If they understand that orthopedics is profitable, they have to support you on what you do. So that the ratio that Cynthia put up is also very important. Understanding that they're also reinvesting back into you is an important part of how healthy that business is.
We're talking a lot about numbers when we look at a private practice and things like that, but the reality is like private practices don't really make a lot of money from the professional fees of being in practice and seeing patients and doing surgery. They make money off of ancillaries. So when you're having these conversations, you have to think about also like, okay, so, you know, how do I get involved in your ancillaries? What is my buy-in for the ancillary? What is the financial health of the ancillary? Maybe it's the surgery center, maybe it's the x-ray, maybe it's the MRI. All those things are just as important to the practice and how you get involved.
So you mentioned ancillaries, and that's certainly the ability to become partner and buy into a practice. What are some tips that you guys have, this is for all the panelists, what are some tips that you have about how do you ask those questions? You know, when are you going to need a new MRI? When are you planning to open up a new medical office building? And so how does that factor into your decision about what your cost to become partner is going to become?
Neil, you want to take that?
Yeah, it's very important. So, I mean, I looked at different private practices, and there's different tracks. So you want to understand, what is the track? Like, are you going to have a salary for a couple years, and then are you going to buy into the practice, and how does that work? And, you know, there was places where it seemed like it would take me 10 years to make the buy-in back, and other places where maybe I'd make it back in 3 months, which doesn't make sense, right? So it's got to be something fair. Maybe it's a couple years. What's your experience? Like, you're investing into the practice ancillaries, and maybe it's 2 years before you make a return on your investment. So it's a big, usually a big allotment of your own cash to do it, but it makes sense. So if there's a period for a year or two where you're filling out the practice and you have some salary, and that's good, and then you're finding out what the buy-in should be and what the return should be, and those are things you have to understand right away. I mean, not right away on the first day, but same discussion with understanding the financial health of the practices, understanding like what it means to become a partner here, what is my buy-in, what is my return on my buy-in, what am I actually buying, am I buying equity in the practice or what? So those are all things you have to understand from the beginning.
So I love the, when you interview for your job and you get to that stage where you go visit, you're gonna have a dinner with the people in your practice, okay? Where do you think you should sit? You don't want to sit next to the most senior person. You want to sit to their most recent hire, because that person is the person you're going to ask, hey, did you make partner yet? What was the buy-in? How was it structured? Do I have to take out a loan, or they'll let me kind of divvy it up every quarter and make quarterly payments? Right? When you have that dinner, that's my favorite time to ask the questions to the person they just hired a couple of years before me. That's the person you want to kind of pick their brain and all this stuff. If they're willing, if they're like, oh yeah, they're like 5 years in, they haven't made partner, I'd be like, okay, I'll probably see you tomorrow. I'm gonna walk away from that job. So that's a really good time to ask too. And they should be proud of bringing up junior people and having them partner and be successful. So that's a sign of a healthy business.
Yeah, and think about what's important to you, right? I mean, these are practices that have buy-ins and have partnership and stuff like that. And maybe, and that's probably less and less common these days, right? If you're getting a hospital employed job, it's a completely different discussion. So if you want to go and you want to be in a practice and you want to buy in and you want to be there for a long time, I mean, that's a big commitment. So think about that's really what you want. This is a place you probably want to be there for a long time, and you're interested in buying into the practice because this is a place you want to be and you want to help grow the practice and all those things that come with it.
I was going to say, when looking at buying into a private practice, like you were saying, talk to the younger people. The older partners maybe that started the firm are going to have a little bit different perspective and incentive on it. Also understand the real estate. A lot of practices have a lot of value in the real estate, and making sure you understand how you get out of the practice. A lot of these old partnership agreements and things like that weren't really set up for today's tax code and some other things, and it can be really difficult to get out of them. So make sure you understand that. I would also say, as we were talking, the debt is really important. You have these private equity firms coming in that are leveraging, interest rates are very low. You had practices borrowing to buy buildings, buying equipment. Through COVID, maybe they took out a loan for payroll. Really understanding what the debt burden is of that practice, and also what your obligations are, the individual physicians. Some of these loans from banks and things like that, even if you leave the practice, you're not necessarily relieved of the obligation of the debt. So really pay attention to that. It's been a lot of low interest rate fueled debt that's been put on practices recently.
Yeah, she just to repeat it on the mic. She made a great point. Like, being a partner is different everywhere. So what does it mean to be a partner? How do you get distributions? Are you involved in the leadership and things like that going forward?
So David, you talked about debt. It's possible there's a few people in this room that may be entering practice that have a little bit of debt. So let's say you got your 200 grand in the hole, maybe 300 grand in the hole, something like that. That's probably reasonable. Some people 500 even, if you're private kind of along the way. And then the idea of having to buy into a practice and acquire and accumulate more debt 2 years from now, when you really haven't even begun to pay down anything, any principal of your other loans, like walk us through how do you do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm actually going to talk about that a little bit at lunch. But yeah, watching the debt is really important. This is not my quote. I think Einstein said it. If you can't explain it to a sixth grader and they don't understand, then it's too complicated. And your practice should be able to explain to you how your return works. In my firm, we actually have partners buy into ours as well, and I lay out for them exactly when they'll make a return on their money based on what we have done historically, what our projections are. And so your practice should be able to walk through that with you. How are you going to make the return on that? But just be cautious of loading on a bunch of debt to your personal balance sheet if you're not sure how you're going to make that back. The illusion of buying into a practice today, especially there are some really well-run practices. There are medical practices that are going bankrupt. There are medical practices that your equity is worth nothing. And some places you're buying in essentially to buy the old partners out, but the practice is not actually worth anything. I think you were talking about a practice that had, $8 billion practice. There are very valuable medical practices out there. There are a lot of practices out there that are worth zero. And so making sure that you don't borrow a bunch of money to buy into a practice that will not be able to buy you out, or will you be able to return on your investment after a number of years?
Does everybody know what a pro forma is? Maybe Cynthia can just touch on that when we're talking about like investments and things like that. You should understand what a pro forma is. It's basically a projection. This is my investment. This is how many patients I expect to see. This is what I expect my cost to be. This is what I expect to make the first year, the second year, the third year. And, so people will show you their pro forma, and, usually it's, they're being like very generous with
Cut it in half.
What they show you. So understand what a pro forma is. Look at a pro forma. If you're getting involved in a private practice, if you're getting involved in an ancillary and you're making an investment, you understand what that is and try to be realistic about it.
Yeah, when you're looking at the debt, what I always tell people is assume what the pro forma is half, and can you live on that? Also, if you're buying into a private practice, we were joking, don't go buy the Ferraris, don't have the $2 million house. If you want to be an owner of the practice, watch the personal expense so that if the practice does get in trouble somehow, you don't completely collapse the house of cards. If you want to buy into the practice, keep the other debt, the personal debt to a minimum. If you're just starting out and there's a 5-year path to partnership, make sure you're saving some money away. Maybe you don't have to borrow so much in 5 years. Maybe that's part of your savings plan, is to start accumulating some of that buy-in from the first day you step into that practice. And
that factors into, when you talked about saving money, that makes a difference with when you decide when am I ready for a PA or a nurse practitioner. All of those things factor into your decisions. Yes, they might make your life a lot easier initially. If you're on the hook for paying for that salary and fringe of that person, that's between $120,000, $150,000 a year, depending on where you live, of money that you could have otherwise allocated towards a practice buy-in. And so those are all just things that you have to think about. There's not a one right answer for this particular thing. It's really variable, and you have choices to make. My boss will say, like a PA, they can make you more efficient, they can make your life better, and there's like very specific things that a PA can do for you to help you in your practice. You just really want to be thoughtful and intentional about when you want to have all those resources to help you, and are they really going to amplify your practice and make you busier? Or conversely, if you want lifestyle issues and you're willing to pay for that, that's okay too.
Yeah, some of the best advice I ever got was live like a resident until you can't. drove a 2012 Honda Accord until it had like a 275,000 miles on it. I had to have a milk crate behind my chair because it kept falling back. Because I promised myself I wouldn't buy a new car until I paid off my loans. So I came out about $500,000 in debt. I paid off my debt, my mom's, and my credit card debt because I lived in New York City. I accumulated probably about $60K in credit card debt living there as a resident. And then luckily my wife, she was in IBR. We just got it forgiven. We got like 125 grand forgiven, which was something short of a miracle. But yeah, that's just live super cheap for as long as you can. You'll never regret that.
I have no idea what a ballpark would be for a typical return on your investment for a buy-in to partnership or a buy-in to an ASC. I know it's probably a broad spectrum, but you mentioned, if it sounds unreasonable, what sounds
What's
unreasonable
reasonable?
to you? Like, I have no idea.
Well, I think every practice is different, but I think number one, like, a running theme through all of this is transparency, right? They have to show you what's been done, how other people are doing, and what they would expect you to do reasonably. And, if the other partners in the practice are pretty happy, and, they get to go home and see their kids, and, they're all in private school, and, they're doing pretty well, and that's an indication of, how well it's doing. I don't think there's a set number, right? But if the buy-in's too high and the buy-in's too long, that's a red flag, right? If a total joint ASC is not, you can call Brian Culp or Mike Ass and see what a normal return for an ASC should be in that area. If they're not making money, something's wrong, right? So there are red flags you can go through, but I think it all starts with transparency, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think, as you said, it's going to be different for every practice and different locations, but also, why do you want to be a partner? For some people, it's just to have a little bit more say in what happens in the practice, and so the financial ROI may be a little bit different. If you're looking just for financial ROI, the PE firms that are coming in, they're not getting 20% on their money, like they're not even going to look at your practice. So if you want a number, but I think there are other reasons to do it besides just the financial ROI. But
so the time, like, if you want a rule of thumb, and I think this was Mike's rule of thumb, which is if the amount of money you're going to be getting in a surgery center is going to take you more than 5 years to return the money you had to, like, your monthly distribution is going to cost you more than 5 years. I think like 3 to 5 years is what most people would say. So if you're looking for a rule of thumb of should I put money into this, you should be getting your money back and then turning it into profit within that ballpark time range.
which, by the way, being a math person, that's 20%. A 5-year return, a 5-year payback is a 20% return.
That's why he's the money
surgery
guy.
center.
But you're absolutely right. That's right.
Surgery center equity buy-ins are usually structured as a multiple of the equity of the distribution. So it should be structured in a way where, like, okay, this is what you're making, so this is what your buy-in is, and you should be able to, if we keep doing it this way, you'll make it back in 3 years or something like that.
But the landscape's forever changing. I mean, I was on a call with Rothman, and their like whole contract structure, it's in flux now because there are people that are upset because the more money you make, the more you contribute to overhead, and those people at the top are like, well, so, I generate $5 million in collections. Why do I have to pay more overhead for the next guy who's not making as much? So they're having this like internal kind of discussion now about how they even out overhead. So just like Cynthia said earlier, like I love being up here at every one of these courses because the look on everyone's face is the same. Like, holy shit, how do I remember all the? We don't know everything. It's just you have to just keep thinking about it all the time, and that's like the most important thing. It's a forever evolving concept of this, and unfortunately, it's a part of our lives.
I would say, like Cynthia went over a lot of stuff, it's to equate it to what you do for a living is figure out what the vital signs are. You need to know heart rate, blood pressure, BMI, whatever, those type of things. Pick out, each practice will be a little bit different, but pick out the 5 or 6 things that give the health of the practice. Just like you look at the health of the patient, you can do 1,000 tests on somebody, but there are certain key indicators. Figure out what those are for the type of practice you're in and focus on those instead of, trying to understand the the complete financial statements, especially when you're first starting out. Figure out what other people are looking at and what makes your practice work, and focus on those, 5 or 6 key indicators.
And if you're looking like, oh shit, like what the heck, I'm never gonna remember this, leverage your network that you're all right here, leverage each other and share and be transparent, because that's the only way you're all gonna grow together. You're not against each other, you're all working together, and I think that's really important to take away.
I think this is super helpful, guys, especially for everyone in the audience that is going into private practice, but a lot of us are going to go into either hospital-employed or university-employed contracts. So Cynthia, for you in particular, as the person up there who is in that kind of a model, how does that apply to the rest of us that aren't going to be looking at a private practice to buy into, don't have a partnership pathway, don't have some of these other things that are available to us necessarily?
Yeah, and I think it speaks a little bit to what Rich had alluded to before, is as you create more value, as you, maybe your collections go up, as you're doing more stuff, as you're getting busier, what is that reinvestment back to the department? And that can be lots of different things. How are you valued in your institution? That may be professional development opportunities. That may be, someone paying for you to go to business school. Like, there's lots of different things that can be different than just direct money into your pocket, that they can be, that the hospitals and health systems feel a lot more comfortable with than things like owning, physician-owned ASCs. Even though it's not illegal, it is usually, most hospital systems are not going to support that kind of model. And so you just really want to think about what are the things that are important to you, and how can you, maybe the hospital will pay for your PA. Maybe they will provide an inpatient APP for you to help manage all that stuff if you agree to go to this other site to do cases or to build a business somewhere else. So there's really there's a series of lots of different kinds of carrots. You just have to think about what are the things that are important to you, what do you value?
So I also think that, and Carl, I know because you and my wife are in the same practice model, so I'm very familiar with your setup. I will always say this, I've said this to my trainees, I say it to my fellows now, even if you're in an academic or hospital-employed model, you should know your worth. And what I mean by that is, when you get your quarterly report on how your productivity is and how it's broken down, you should still pay attention to how many RVUs you're doing, even though you're a salaried academician, right? Because at the end of the day, that's going to be a part of your value, and when you need to negotiate certain things with your chairman, that's going to be the only quantitative data you really have to say, like, hey, I need a little help, right? I collected 5 times what you're paying me, and I'm not, I just need this to make sure I get home on time. You know what I'm saying? So, like, there are ways to understand kind of your value and your worth, and I think that continuously you should know what you're doing moving forward, because we were just, like hospital, like I'm hospital employed. I know Columbia's bad at this too, but like they're terrible with returns, right? Like I have my collection rate on a good year is 23%. Like, how is that possible, right? Like, that's like any other business, that's a failing business, right? So, like, understanding that, because at some point, they're like at our place too, they're like, oh, you cost too much money, right? You're making too much money. And my return to them is like, you guys aren't making enough off of me, right? And they'll always say also, we don't count downstream revenue. I was like, well, I do, right? Because I see 100 patients a week, and I send out advanced testing for about 50% of those people, right? So understanding that part of your value, even if you're not in a private practice model, I think is extremely important.
Yeah, you have to understand your contribution margin to the whole hospital, like, right? If they just show you this is like what you brought in and this is what we paid you, they're losing money on you, right? But if it's just looking at your professional fees, but if you look at the facility fees you bring to the OR, the MRIs, the physical therapy, and if you can get that data when you sit down and negotiate them, like, you'll find that most of the time they make 5 to 6 times on you what they pay you because of all the other things you're contributing. So, when you renegotiate, you have to have that data as well to show how valuable you are.
And that's where you have to be a little bit careful about transitioning to a surgery center. So we've had a couple of false starts with that. As you transition your cases, say you're a joints guy, and you're primarily doing your cases in a hospital-based facility. And maybe there, that we've made the switch. Pretty much everybody now is roughly, I'd say, 70% outpatient at least. I mean, we made the flip from, we were 70-30 inpatient to outpatient 3 years ago, and now we're 70-30 outpatient. So the margin of all those cases is decreased substantially. And if you guys don't know the numbers, I mean, just pick a procedure and look at what the anticipated margin is for a total knee in a hospital-based facility versus what the margin is for a total knee in a surgery center, freestanding ASC. It is dramatically different, like threefold different. And so as your value goes down because your reimbursement based on what you're doing has gone down, the hospital, you then put yourself at risk. And the hospital's like, well, you're not worth what we're paying you now because you're not bringing in as much money. And so that's where you really want to be very thoughtful and intentional about, well, what are the other ways that you can demonstrate value? Maybe moving your cases to a surgery center has allowed more complex spine deformity to be backfilled in the hospital. And so that's the way that one of the things that we've done at Wake Forest is we've increased our case mix index with our main hospital by increasing the complexity of cases that we're doing in the hospital by pushing some of the other cases to less acute sites. So the health system benefits, but it speaks to that kind of for the system approach instead of for the focusing on the individual approach. If you look at it just from an individual perspective, yes, I think people are going to be put at risk, and there's a lot of chatter in communities about how the anticipated salaries for orthopedic surgeons are going to be going down. And that's largely because of the shift to outpatient. We have gotten so good at taking care of patients and recovering them early that now these are some of the unintended consequences of being efficient and doing good things for patients.
That's such an important point. Like, think about your setup, right, at Lawrence. Right? Think about Milstein. Why on God's green earth is Bill Levine still doing his scopes in Milstein in a main hospital, right? It's because they make a shit ton more money as Columbia in the hospital than him going to a surgery center, right? Like, why does Mel Rosenwasser he's a hand surgeon for 25 years. Why does he have a main hospital room, right? It's because they make more money. It's something that, like, no one ever told us this in residency, right? We don't care. We just go where we were told. So that's a really important point you bring up. You have to be careful about that too.
And as you're looking at practices and you want to think about where are your options to operate, and going to back to Mike's talk with contracts, you want to make sure that you're asking, where am I expected to operate, and have that in your contract. If you get pushed somewhere else, then that really can, especially if you're collection space, that really can have a significant impact on what your salary is going to be.
Yeah, I mean, you guys really made some good salient points, while acquiring that data and presenting it to them. But how do you get those costs of what you sent to PT and how much they made and MRIs, and because I don't know where to find it. I know that Epic has, the thing for the attendings where you can go in and see how much you've billed for, and that's that data. But where do you get all that other stuff from?
I mean, you should be able to track your referrals. You should be able to track physical therapy. Every EMR system is different, but you should be able to track the patients that you referred to physical therapy, that referred to MRI. You may not be able to know exactly how much they profited from each one, but then you can create your own, little pro forma. Like, I made 50 referrals to physical therapy, and my average patient, and we do this in our practice. Like, the average patient goes to physical therapy 4 times. Our average reimbursement is $100. So, I mean, you can come with data that's based on actual referrals and then some averages of visits and reimbursements. What do you guys think? Or how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the values of EMR, right? Whatever what it is, if you try and make it an order, it's trackable data, right? So every time you order PT through the EMR, anytime you order labs, MRI, CT scan, nuclear scan consult, whatever it is, consult to IR, whatever it is, if you put it through the EMR, it's trackable data. One of my sites is really good at it, the other one's not. So at the other one, which is it's in the same systems too, so it's like unbelievable. But on the other site, I've gone literally on my printout of my daily thing, I'll write down by hand PT or MRI.
But you may also just need to ask someone, right? You may go and say, hey, can you let me know how many, I'm just curious to track my own performance. How many PT referrals did I put in last year?
Yeah.
That's what
I don't work for the hospital, so they don't have to give me any of these numbers. I've asked, and like, we'll get that to you. And they may not give it to you because they don't want you to know your worth, and they don't have to because it's not necessarily you're entitled to that. But ask.
Yeah, I was going to say, kind of put on my other hat as chairman of the board of a health system is relatively small one. I can't speak for a larger one, but we would encourage you to ask. Like we know when one of our orthopedic surgeons is on vacation because it's so obvious. And for most health systems, we want to work with the orthopedic surgeons to do better and to be more productive and for them to have a balance. And so I would say just ask, find someone in the finance or in the leadership of the organization that understands the value of orthopedics to their system and ask them, and they'll be able to produce the data for you.
If they know what they're doing, they know, right? I mean, like if they're doing a good job, they know what you're doing and how many because that's how they figure out how much to pay you.
Yeah, and surprisingly, there's very few surgeons that are in an employed model or in an academic center that know all of that information. It's very easy to actually to get it. Your finance person can get it, your practice manager can get it. The marketing people have it because they look to see where you're leaking referrals out. There are some health systems that track the number of external orders that you do for external PT orders and whatnot. And while patients have choice, there are some health systems that you'll get a call from the CMO if your external referrals or your referrals outside the system go above a certain threshold because they want to keep all the referrals internal. And those are the things that nobody's going to tell you about. Maybe one of the junior guys, but that's a fair question to ask if you're interviewing practices. Can you show me the downstream revenue and ancillaries and referrals of someone who's maybe been in the practice for 3 years?
And remember to ask innocuously, and don't ask the CFO or the person who's you're negotiating your contract with, because they're going to want those numbers to be low. They're going to want to hide that number. What you want to do is go on one of your committee meetings at some point and find the person who works for the person who works for the CFO, right? Like, they don't have a lot of doctor friends. They love a little special attention. Buy them a cup of coffee and just become friends with them. And then if you become friends with them, be like, hey, and by the way, any idea how much money I made for PT last year? And they'll be so excited to get it for you because you're their friend. And then you go back to CFO and be like, by the way, I made you this much money in PT last year, right? You got to it is a game a little bit, and you have to learn how to play the game. And hospitals, especially if it's not an employed situation, will try to not, like to Brian's point, they're not super excited to give you leverage against them. So find ways to get it, but there's a lot of people who can get it for you.
Salient point.
So in regards to the ASC and ASC use, are you guys seeing a trend of people like us all looking for jobs that they're saying, okay, we want you to do at least 50% of your cases at the ASC, or is that not a conversation that even takes place, or what are the trends in that respect?
Cynthia, so because you had this flip, when new surgeons are coming in, are you having a separate discussion that was different like than 3 years ago?
The most common question that I'm getting if I'm interviewing faculty is they're asking about, well, where am I going to operate? Where am I going to get block time? I don't think it's really been as specified as, am I expected to do a certain percentage of cases in an ASC? I think it's more, can you guarantee that I will have time to operate somewhere? OR, North Carolina is a CON state, and so it's not like there's just operating rooms anywhere and everywhere. And so I think that's really the big constraint that a lot of large health systems are facing right now. You have this main flagship hospital, and you have the guys who have been in practice for 30 years who are doing their knee scopes in this main OR, and then you got everybody else, and they don't care. And then you've got all these new people who are trying to get time for these horrible revisions that are, I got this great patient for you to start out your new practice, right, that you can't go do in an ASC. Meanwhile, you're pissed off because your senior surgeon there is like doing their simple knee scope over in this OR, and you can't get time, so you're doing it on a Friday night at 7 o'clock. That's usually the main practice, probably the biggest complaint that we hear from people who are starting out in practice is you're not given block time starting out. You have to earn it. So you have to figure out, you need to ask what that process is of how do I acquire scheduled block time, because you're not just going to get it. The hospital's not going to give you time so you can sit there and not do anything after you saw 4 patients in your clinic and you talked for an hour and none of them were surgical patients.
Yeah, I think that, remember when you're starting, people alluded to this earlier too, you're not, when you watch, Bolo's practice, it's a mature, running, efficient model from what he's developed over the last X amount of years. When you start, I was happy to get one room once a month until I grew, until I can get one room once every other week, right? Spreading out the block and then filling my block and things like that. And I took a shit ton of call too. That's how I got busy. But what you just want to place, honestly, I don't know. I'd be scared to start at an ASC. I want to be in the main with people who are next to me, just in case I get in trouble starting. I want to be able to take my time. My patients are going to stay overnight for the first, 6 months to a year of practice because I'm freaking out about every decision I have to make. Right? There's comfort in being in that hospital next to senior people too. So, don't just look to. When you start, you're not going to have a practice that's mature after 10 years. It just doesn't work that way. So just be at a place where you can have time and you can grow from there.
But if you do look at a practice that has an ASC, and you're being recruited, you recruit people because you want them to come and do cases in the ASC. Maybe not day one, but at some point you're attractive to that practice if you do that because you're not an owner at the beginning, but you're increasing the revenue for all the other owners. And obviously you want some fair compensation down the road. So I think you are an attractive candidate to practices with surgery centers if you're willing to start doing some of your cases in a surgery center at some point in your career early on.
But again, like Brian said earlier, right, there are practices where, like, Neil showed up, there are 2 spine guys doing it already, right? So it's a safe space. Like, I think that's the most important thing too. Like, you show up like Brian, and if Brian wasn't careful and he's just trying to knock out same-day total joints, it would have been a disaster, right? So I think walking into that, I want you to come. I got 2 guys. We'll teach you how to do it, Neil. You know what I mean? So that's a setup that you want to look forward to if they're going to start you there.
And everybody's kind of alluded to this. You perfect it in the hospital first, and then when you're ready, then you go to the ASC. And that's what I did too. I didn't do ACDFs right away. I was worried about the hematoma, so I did micro discs first, and then after a while, got more comfortable. We have 5 minutes.
So I wanted to shift gears in just the last few minutes and go back to David with maybe some insights or some mistakes what are some common mistakes that you're seeing from a financial perspective with smaller practices, whether single group, single person or small group? What are some of the mistakes that you've seen over the years?
Yeah, one is not understanding the financials, maybe not to the MBA level, but you are the owner of the practice, and you have to have some basic understanding of what's going on in the practice. Number 2 is you're seeing patients all day, you're doing surgeries, you're doing that kind of thing. You have to have a practice manager that knows what they're doing. You have to have a practice manager that's willing to be transparent with you and explain it, and has to have a very good grasp on the financials. That's not your job. We were talking about the role of management. You're the owner, but when you walk in at 8 in the morning or whatever and start your clinic, or you're over at the surgery center or whatever, you're doing your job, and someone has to be looking after the collections, and someone has to be looking after, getting people that have deductibles, getting that money paid before you do their surgeries. And the practice manager and the staff that you surround yourself with is very important. And that's one of the biggest mistakes I see is not having really good staff around you to take care of stuff when you're seeing patients. So don't forget that part. You don't have to be the expert. You have to know what questions to ask of the people that you have hired to run that thing on a day-to-day basis.
And practice managers are really critical. I'm glad you brought that up. There are a lot of small practices where the practice manager might be the spouse of one of the partners. And then you have to really ensure that things are equitable with distribution in the practice, and that can be referrals. So we've all probably had friends, and we've seen some of these where there's maybe like the senior guy in the practice, and his wife is the practice manager, and like the senior guy is getting all the managed care, and then the new guy is getting all the blue, all the Medicare and Medicaid and indigent. And so you just have to be, I think, a little bit cautious. I think in general people are well-intentioned. But I think you just have to be a little bit cautious when there are maybe some different dynamics or dyads within a practice, and try to understand the relationships and how as the new person going into a practice, how do you kind of navigate that?
What recommendations would you have for finding and vetting an excellent practice manager?
I like the old-fashioned networking and asking around. I mean, you can certainly, as a small practice, maybe you can't afford to hire a recruiter, but there are people that specialize in finding practice managers. If you don't want to spend that kind of money, then talk to your other practices, maybe not ortho practice, but other practices in town, because maybe there's an assistant practice manager that's ready to step up and be a practice manager for a smaller firm. But I found that to be very successful, is just get to know some of the other practice managers in your town and ask them, who would you recommend for a practice manager, or hire a recruiter.
And actually, you know, I'm really glad you brought up the practice manager thing too, because that also can give you, I think, a very good indication of the health of the group, the camaraderie amongst the surgeons and the staff of the group. Because if you show up and a practice manager, it's like their third one in 3 years, and they just kind of churn and burn random people, and they don't really know the docs, and they don't know the families, and they don't know the staff or the locations, like, that's a giant red flag. You show up for your interview and your itinerary's tight, and your practice manager, you walk in, she's a boss or he's a boss. They walk, everyone's saying like hello to them, how are they? She's checking on everybody as you're going to the site on your interview and stuff like that, and your tour. That's a good that's a person that you know that's been around for like a long time, and it's contributing to the practice. They care about the practice. So it's something that I had to learn the hard way. You know, the staffing at our place was awful, still is kind of awful. We're like still kind of just chipping at the bit of trying to get better people. But it's something that I didn't look for when I was looking for a job, and it's just supremely important on how easy your life can be early on.
Yeah, so just to repeat for the group, checking references is incredibly important, and even in the midst of a labor shortage where sometimes people hire those that have a pulse and a blood pressure, it is important. Those vital signs are important, but you also have to have the emotional intelligence, which we'll be touching on a little bit later today, the financial acumen, the ability to establish a culture. Those things are really, really critical, key things for a practice manager to really lead that team. So thank you all for your engagement with the session.
Thank you again for listening in. We hope you enjoyed the discussion with our FPA faculty. If you'd like to learn more about our mission or upcoming events, please visit our website at www.buildingasuccessfulpractice.org.